Here we are.
Hey.
We made it. It seemed like,
All
there's
right.
there's a loop button for that. Okay. Anyway, hey, welcome to the Mux Informational live stream where we provide all of the information that you need to be the most successful person in the world. I'm really excited for today's live stream. We're talking with Cameron from over at Tinybird. Say hey, Cameron.
Hey, what's up? This is Cameron. You covered it. I'm from Tinybird.
Well, tell me what is Tinybird and what are we doing? What are we doing here today?
Yeah. So today and you'll cover this a little bit. I think you're going to show us the end product we're going to build, but today we're going to do some user-facing analytics and kind of talk about like multi-tenancy and how we approach those architectures. But Tinybird is a real-time data platform for developers and engineers, data engineers to unify batch and streaming data sources and build real-time data products with SQL and then actually empower the organization to build things with data. And so one of the ways you can think about Tinybird is it's basically a really fast database that's been abstracted to mostly just be like HTTP and JSON. And so it's a very easy interface to work with a really powerful database.
That's cool. The interesting part when I first heard about Tinybird was the fact that you could just like instantly kind of get the data out that you put into it with that API access into a format that's going to work for your application. I thought that was just like the moment I had that unlock to see that, hey, I could pull all of this data that's getting fed into Tinybird in real time and stand up an API without having to jump through 100 different hoops to get that going.
Yep.
Was incredible. It was just like I was able
Yep.
to go from just nothing truly to API in a matter of minutes. And so I'm pumped to kind of go through some of that today. And I thought we should start off by just showing what we're going to build here on
Yeah.
the
Can I
screen.
actually just interrupt you real quick? Because I think there are a lot of like people from the Tinybird space that maybe want to know a little bit more about Mux and what Mux does and what y'all are about. So I'm going to
Yeah,
make you do the same thing.
for sure. Yeah. So Mux is a video API platform that will help you to build video into your applications. There's a million different ways that you can get video into your apps, but they often come with a lot of gotchas, unexpected bills, and ads that are going to show up. Maybe not so much control over how your videos are going to appear. And so Mux tries to sort of reduce all of that and enable you to build custom video experiences into the applications that you're working on that match your brand, look really well, are super performant, can scale with your business as it grows, and also provide some visibility into how your videos are performing as well. So we're kind of a developer first approach. We like to really highlight the developer experience. Great docs available and guides and support along the way. So that's what we're all about at Mux, is giving you some way to play back the media that you are looking to incorporate into your applications. So it's kind of an interesting crossover here of being able to have the media side of Mux, but also um, the data side of Tinybird, where we want to be able to track how many different people are coming through and watching some of the video content that you're uploading. And we have some of that over on Mux, but we don't necessarily, what we generally do is provide you an kind of a high level overview of all of the content that's happening within your account. And you can use different filters to drill down and see what that ends up looking like for specific subsets of your users. But it's generally meant to provide you, the person that's integrating your data or the video into your application, at kind of like some observability into how your videos are performing within your whole set of users, essentially. But if you're looking to like build a subset of charts and analytics for your users to help them understand how are my videos performing, and maybe what is some of the best content that I've been producing. There's kind of we need to add on another product here. We need to take all of the concepts that or all the data that comes with a particular viewing session or a playback session if you're using audio, um, and kind of crunch the numbers a little further. So we'll have a way that we can get the data out of Mux over to Tinybird and kind of have that collaboration come together. So it's a really good example of what we can do with the two services here. I think I should just start off by showing what exactly we're going to build. So
Yeah, let's do it.
what we show here on the screen is this dashboard, would be something like for an application that you're building with, or for example, like a SaaS application for user generated content. Um, and this one in particular, I mean, we're looking at some of the top tracks here. We're going for a playback of we were calling it Sound Sphere, which is like an back platform. This particular user is really heavy into the punk rock tracks, and they're seeing that their top playback session is for their track of Riot Generation. I tried to actually upload
It's a banger.
I tried to upload or generate a track that we could use for this live stream as well, about like using this one AI tool. It's like, hey, give me audio, like a punk rock track about big data, so we could play it here on the stream, and it kept generating lyrics that were like, big data is always coming after us, and it kind of worked, it worked against what we're going for here, because big
Yeah.
data, here's the thing, data is expected in applications that you're building these days, right? Like, if you have a SaaS application or a UGC app and aren't offering these sorts of metrics to your users, they're going to feel like they don't have a complete picture of what's happening. So it's incredibly important that you can not only allow your users to have that transparency and understand how their content is performing, so they can continue to improve over time and grow, but it also helps increase product stickiness, and gives them something to kind of check in on, and want to come back and see if they are doing better than they were last week or last month. So it's incredibly important to have this kind of feature set. And I think we should just kind of walk through like what it actually takes from having a video over in Mux and then getting the data from a playback session out of Mux over to Tinybird, where we can then kind of, like I said here, crunch the numbers and understand and break down what this sort of data picture looks like for a specific user. Am I explaining that okay? Does that sound all right?
Yeah, yeah. I think you covered it. And while you're switching screens, just mention, one of the things a lot of Tinybird customers are doing user facing analytics. It's a very common like entry use case, and it's we have to think about a lot of things when it comes to the data. Is one is like scale. Um, the scale we're going to be working at this in this demo today might seem big for some, but it's not really big for Tinybird. But user concurrency, we have a lot of different users accessing this data, and then obviously speed and performance. Like when we have a user facing dashboard, I think we've all probably used a SaaS or two that has like an embedded Looker dashboard or an embedded like BI tool, and the performance is typically really bad, and it makes for a really bad user experience. And so that's one of the things we always have to focus on is like how do we make it scale and still be fast, so that the end user experience is great.
Yeah, that speed is really important. It kind of feels a little uncomfortable or awkward if you're sitting there waiting for something to load for a minute or 2 minutes. Probably pretty likely to lose the person's attention or interest if that's what
Yep.
you're presenting. So that makes a ton of sense. I wanted to show the Mux side of things here in the dashboard. So we have a video that I've loaded up that we'll use as an example for this particular session. And I think I threw it over here actually in this code sandbox. So this video is uploaded to Mux. When you're using Mux, you can get a playback ID, which acts as like the reference basically to your media over on Mux, of what you want to play back. Maybe it is a video, maybe it's just an audio track that's supported as well. And here I'm using this playback ID for this specific video, and also setting some metadata right here on the player that's associated with this video. You'd probably load this from a database somewhere. Once the viewer tries to watch a specific video, would have this metadata associated with it. You might also set some of this on demand based off of the environment that they are currently loading in. You can kind of override these pieces of metadata, and there's a bunch of these properties as well. We're kind of using a very small subset here today. But this in particular, we're saying, let's throw this video into Mux Player, and we're going to associate the title of my rockin' video, the user ID, maybe the specific user that's logged in watching this video. You want to kind of understand their viewing habits, and so you could also associate their user ID with the playback session. And then the sub-property ID, which is one we're going to be focusing on here today too, which is in Mux when we're tracking the playback sessions, we can also associate, hey, not only is this playback associated with my account, the business owner's account, but it's associated with this customer of mine, this specific account. So instead of just being able to have visibility as like a super admin into the playback performance of a particular viewing session, I can really allow that data then to drill down into specific customers of mine. So we'll use the sub property ID as the means of kind of tracking all of that. Once it's over in Mux, we have the ability to then export it over to Tinybird. Now in Mux, I should also say here, you get a lot of visibility into what specific views are looking like. When we call a playback session a view, and when that occurs, you can really see a lot of interesting data about how that specific viewing session performed. So we can click in and kind of really understand more information about, hey, what was the environment that this was viewed on, the system, the operating system, the browser, the device, that kind of thing. But again, we're looking to kind of crunch this collectively for a huge subset of views that are happening and then show that in an app dashboard. So we need to, rather than use the Mux data super admin type of view for this, we need to get this data elsewhere over to Tinybird in this instance that allows us to then do that further crunching. So one way that we can get that data out with Mux is by using a streaming export. Streaming export. Make sure I say that right. And essentially what that means is let's set up a queue in the middle. In this case, it's using a Kinesis with a Kinesis Firehose stream, where on every time one of those views ends, we will take that view data. And as soon as we have that data ready to go, we'll export it over to a Kinesis stream over on AWS. And that will then hand that off after it gets, the batch or the queue filled up at the interval that you set, hand it off to Firehose, which will then kind of pipe it over to Tinybird in this instance. So I have this little diagram here that helps to kind of visualize that a little bit easier too, where you can see on the left side, there's this input, which is in this case, Mux data. As soon as it has that, it'll stream it over to Kinesis data. And then you can kind of continue down that pipeline and handle that data however you see fit so that you can ultimately output it to those charts. So I won't go through the specifics of setting up the Kinesis stream and the Firehose today. There's a whole blog post available on that and plenty of guides and docs on that. But what I wanted to do is kind of show what it ends up looking like once we get over to Tinybird, and what do we do once we have some of this data in place. So maybe we can take a look at the Tinybird admin from your side, Cam, and you can kind of walk through what do we do once we have some of this data to kind of like get it ready to go for a chart.
Yeah. Sweet. So, so I mean, I think to Dave's point, like the way that you could get this data out of Mux and into Tinybird, would be to using Kinesis. Really, what the way that works is it's actually going to use probably a Lambda to fire an event to our events API, which is basically just a streaming endpoint that we have. And that's actually, I've got a little data generator that's running in the background, just sort of simulating this Mux data, and it's sending it to Tinybird with just an HTTP request. But Kinesis is just one way of many to get data into Tinybird. But what I'm showing here, let me. I just find it's like helpful to zoom in a little bit. I have this data source here. It's actually shared from. We were working on this project together. You can see. Let's go look at this Mux data, right? So this is this data source that we have, and you can see it's a 1.6 gig over 1 million rows data set right now. So it's that's relatively big. It's not actually that big in Tinybird land, but decently sized data source. And when we look at this data source, you see we have 3 columns, and we can also look at the schema here, right? So we have a records data, which is basically an array of strings and those are actually what's sent over from Mux. And then this request ID and a timestamp, and that timestamp is kind of a Unix millisecond timestamp. And then the other thing I want to call out is that this data, we've set this up so the sorting key is by timestamp. A lot of times when you're building user-facing analytics, you want to request data, especially time series data, within time ranges. And when we set up the primary sorting key in a Tinybird data source, basically what we're doing. So Tinybird uses ClickHouse as its database under the hood. That's a columnar database. It's used columnar storage. And so basically what we're telling Tinybird to do is, hey, for this data source, I want you to store all of the timestamps, similar timestamps together on disk, or sort it by timestamp. So when we start to read from that table, we can filter by timestamp, and it'll actually minimize the amount of data that we have to read. But let's just for fun here, I'm going to open up a playground just so we can actually see like how many records we have. Okay, so we're at about 1.2 million records and counting, right? So we're actively streaming data into this data source, refresh, and you can see that count is going up. But Tinybird, so what you see over here is down here, we've got data sources and we have pipes. And pipes are what Tinybird's way of basically allowing us to query the data that we have. And then we'll create some API endpoints from that data. So I'm going to create a pipe. And actually my first thing to do is I need to parse this data here, this big records data, because actually it's encoded. So the first thing I'm going to do is decode this data. So let's start there. We're just going to do a base64 decode of, I'm going to call it encoded M. We'll call that message, and then we're going to convert that timestamp that we have, and we'll just call this as kinesis TS, right? And then I'm actually going to just sort of flatten that array, records data as encoded M. What did I do wrong? Select.
There's also a step here of when the data comes out of Mux, it's just in your typical JSON format. And you could choose a different format if you prefer to work with that. But just a JSON format that comes over, and really through Kinesis, it's like an endpoint, like you said. It's just an API that kind of soaks up all the data that is coming out of Mux over to Tinybird in JSON format, but it comes over in that encoded way. There we go.
Okay, I had something wrong, but yeah. So it's coming over in that. So I've kind of decoded this data. And you can see we have this message column here, and you can see all of this. It's basically a massive JSON string. And so I'm actually going to, I'm going to call this pipe parse events. And what I'm going to do is, so we're first decoding this. So in Tinybird, if you're not familiar with it, Tinybird pipes are basically made up of nodes of SQL. So I can query over each subsequent node. It's kind of like using like a common table expression in SQL, but we just kind of break it up into these nodes, much easier to maintain. And so I'm going to create another node here. And what I'm basically going to do is I'm just going to pull out the properties from this message string that we are going to use to build our dashboard. And rather than type this all out, I am just going to copy and paste, because I think that will save us all a bunch of time. And then I'm going to select from that decode node that I just created. So what you can see is I'm just using this ClickHouse function, JSON extract string from the message, and then I'm getting all of these, the values for these different keys. So if I run that, you'll now see, okay, I have all these columns with the data that we want. That's actually all of this playback data. And now I'm going to, what I'm going to do for reasons I'll explain later is I'm going to create a materialized view out of this. And what a materialized view is in Tinybird is effectively it's a data source, but it's an incrementally updating data source. So
Hmm.
as new data streams in to our kind of our landing data source, so as new data arrives from Mux, we're going to process that data, we're going to parse it, and then we're going to write it to a new data source. And those, we're not actually doing any aggregation here, but that's really a common pattern in Tinybird is to actually do your aggregations as the data hits the database rather than on query time. And that's a big kind of performance lever in Tinybird. And because Materialized views in Tinybird update incrementally as new data is ingested, you're basically doing that aggregation. You're running that compute once when the data is ingested, and not every time you query. So let's just go ahead and oh, can I not create current query has changed. I guess I changed it. I don't remember that. Why is it saying that? That's odd. There we go. I guess we just had a UI bug there. That's fine. Okay, so I'm going to create, basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a table from the result set from this query. And I'm just going to call this core stats MV because these are our core stats. And then I'm going to change the sorting key here. So you can see it kind of has this default, but couple of things. So this sub property ID, this is like the tenant ID that we get from Mux. So as we're building these user-facing analytics, we've got all this multi-tenant data in this table. But when we serve those analytics to users, we want to only show the data for that tenant or for that user. And so I'm going to set the sub property ID as the primary sorting key because we're always going to be filtering by that sub property ID. And then I will choose view start as kind of a timestamp filter as well.
So that's really the only distinction really between all these different rows. The only way you really know like whose is what is by using this one value and kind of filtering on that. So we're not showing like basically the wrong analytics to the wrong queries.
Exactly. And there's obviously a security kind of component to this. I mean, I'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's create an API, and then I'll kind of talk about how we can handle multi-tenancy and handle security in Tinybird. But I'm going to go ahead and just going to get all the data and create this materialized view. And so you can see basically I have this parse events pipe that's writing to this core stats MV. And now I have this new data source. And if we go in here, we can see that data source is being created. It's being populated right now. You can kind of see how that process with all the historical data that was already in there. And so now I have this materialized view that I can sort of query over. So Dave, you want to show that the dashboard again, just so we can like have a reference point for, which what kind of visualizations we need to support here?
Yeah, definitely. So this dashboard, so let's just consider some common things that you might care about as a punk rock audio producer. You want to know how many people are listening historically. Have more people listened, today than they have yesterday? What about this new track that I just dropped called "Anarchy in the Suburbs"? How's it doing, right? So we have what we're looking at here today is plays per day, and we're doing a look back period of just a week, so we can demonstrate just a small subset of what this data looks like. Top locations, where is my music trending? The top tracks of, again, if I have an EP, what are the best songs off that EP? What are most people listening to? We also have this live listeners, which will be kind of interesting. This one's not updating in real time I have to reload the page to get this one updated. Maybe I'll submit another PR to get that real time wired up. But this will show you, just look back at the past 60 seconds once you load that chart up. Did anybody listen in that past minute? And if so, how many folks? Kind of show you a heat map, and we'll watch that in action. And then there's a device breakdown as well to take a look at what are most people watching or listening to my content on, what kind of devices. So we have a bunch of different values here. You could also set some of your own values. I mentioned that before, but if some of these values aren't working for you, provide a lot of defaults in Mux data. You can also say like, there's I don't know. There's one in here that I saw that was like car browser, and I was like, oh, interesting. Many people listening to my music in the car browser. No, I wasn't expecting that, but So yeah, we're taking a look at just a wide array of a bunch of different pieces of data here.
Yeah, I guess car browsers like Apple Play, or I don't know what that, or Apple
Yeah, yeah,
CarPlay.
exactly.
Is that how
I
that
drive a
works?
2015, so I can't speak to any of that.
Nice. Yeah, that's new tech. Okay, so let's start simple, and I'm gonna create an API to just get that top devices. I feel like that's a really easy one. So we're gonna create a pipe here, and we're gonna select from this core stats MV, and I'm just gonna call this top devices with proper typing. So let's just do something like this. Let's select subproperty ID, device, and we'll just count the number of devices. And then, so we're going to group by subproperty ID. Goodness gracious. Typing's hard. My hands always get cold when I do live streams, I guess because I get nervous.
Just wear gloves.
Yeah, right. Yeah, dexterity is no problem there.
Right.
And actually, so like you could see, I'm getting a result basically for every subproperty ID and every device category. I'm getting this aggregation. Now, I want to show something here. I'm processing 75 megabytes of data every time I run this query, and because I'm analyzing, about 1.2 million rows and counting. Tinybird's pretty fast. Like Tinybird's doing that in 60 milliseconds, so that's great. It's great that that's fast, but you've probably noticed this persistent warning here. It's like, hey, be careful with full scans. This is going to be a problem. Yeah. So what we want to do is actually limit the full scans. Now, there's a couple ways we can do this. Going back to this kind of multi-tenancy question, which is we want to filter by a subproperty ID, right? We only want the data for a particular tenant. There's a couple ways we can do that. One is we could use Tinybird's query parameters. And we could just say, I'm going to call this query parameter tenant ID. Actually, hold on. I'm not going to put it right here. I'm going to add a filter here. So we could say where, subproperty ID equals, and then pass a parameter, right? And just I'll call it sub ID. And then maybe I just set a default value. And if I did this, now I'm only going to get the results for that subproperty ID, which would be, basically what we wanted. And actually, let me just order by this count. So you can kind of see like, hey, this is one user, all the different devices and the plays on that device. And so basically what would happen is we'd have this API where we could pass this query parameter, but we don't want an API where we're passing, tenant IDs back and forth. That's not really the way that we would want to approach this. So we're gonna change this up here. So I'm gonna go back to this full scan. Don't worry, we're fine. Actually, before I do that, I do just want to show, like, if you remember, we set up this core stats materialized view where that sorting key subproperty ID is the primary sorting key. So you can see the difference here. Instead of processing, 1.2 million rows, now we're processing 20,000 in about 6 milliseconds, right? So we got several orders of magnitude less data that we're processing in a much faster query. But let's do some multi-tenancy magic here. And so I'm gonna publish this as an endpoint. So here's the fun thing in Tinybird. You can take any SQL query, come up here to the right, create API endpoint, and voila, you have an HTTP endpoint. I can actually just copy this sample usage.
The confetti was a really nice touch
Paste.
there.
Isn't that nice? The confetti is just, everybody loves the confetti. And so you can see we just have, we get this JSON response, right? Where, we have this API. That's awesome. Let's go back to, I forgot to save this.
I mentioned that before, but that was the moment for me that it was like, all right, I suddenly went from like writing queries to now having a fully fledged API endpoint that I could just like make
Yeah.
a request from anywhere and have access to the data that I needed. I just thought that was so the way that would just happened so fast. Yeah, maybe the confetti kind of describes. I was like, wow, that was pretty cool.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome. And I'm going to so let's do. Oh, come on, Chrome. There we go. Okay, so that endpoint not performant how I have it, but what I'm going to do here. So you'll see when I created this endpoint, it created a read token. And if we went back to that request, you'd see that it's passing that token as a query parameter, or we could pass it in the request headers. But I'm going to create a new token. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to still give us read access to that top device's API. We call it a pipe, right? But then I'm going to add a data source scope. And so what I want to do is basically say, and let me come back to this here in a second, actually, because I want to I want to copy over a sub property ID as an example. So let me go find that sub property ID that I want. Here we go. Okay. Copy and paste. All right. So what I want to do is basically say, okay, well, I only want this token to be able to read certain rows in this database, in this materialized view. And so I can add an SQL filter here. Basically just say subproperty ID equals, and then paste that in there. And so what this is basically doing, it's like adding that where filter, but it's doing it at the token level. And so I'm building this token in the UI, but a very common pattern to kind of use. Tinybird has a tokens API that you can use to create these tokens. So like when your application creates a new user, a new tenant, you could spin up that Tinybird token, set that row level security on it, and then sort of assign it to that user. So let's save that token, and I'll just call it we'll call it top devices read with that sub property ID, just for the sake of clarity. Now, if I copy this token, well, actually, I'm going to need to come back and view this API and paste it. So actually, before we do that, let's look. So you can see in the default response, I'm getting all these different sub property IDs. If I paste that token that I just created, boom, there you go. Now I'm only getting data for this one sub property ID, which is exactly what I want. So basically what I've done is I've implemented row level security by giving read tokens to my users that they, that will limit the data that they see. And yeah, so what I'm going to do.
Just so we can kind of summarize what's happened all there. So we were saying, like, in practice, when somebody signs up for your service and creates an account, you would basically make an API call over to Tinybird, generate the token, say, hey, this is the user ID or this is the sub property ID that we want to associate, and give them access to any data that comes in now or later that has that particular value in there. Then I would receive that token back and store it in a database or on a metadata, some metadata that's associated with the user. And then when they load up those charts, they would have the ability to kind of pull only the data that pertains to them based off of that token.
Exactly.
Cool.
And so the nice thing is we're not passing any tenant IDs over an API request. Like, it's managed in the token, and so that's always good. Dave, I'm thinking, just in the interest of time, I'm wondering if maybe what you could show is how is sort of integrating this endpoint that I've just created into your dashboard, how that gets done. And then maybe while you're doing that in the background, I will go ahead and push up all the rest of my of the endpoints that we'll use. Just feel like you've seen one, you've seen enough. There's some fun things we'll do, but I think we'll run out of time if I try to show everything.
This sounds good. This is my favorite part personally, just because I know nothing about writing queries. I would be asking ChatGPT and getting bad queries as a result, because I'm just I don't have the chops there. So I appreciate the insight. Now you turn it into an API and look out, get out of the way. because here comes, it's not good code, but it is code that will show you how this all works. So here's what we have going on. We saw this dashboard. This is just a basic Next.js app. Really, if you go to the root of this, you would see just dashboard. And we have a special route set up that's specific to simulate or emulate a user authentication system. Rather than spending some time to set all of that up, the way that I have it configured is to say, hey, user uh, Cam or user Dave, and based off of what route, let's take a look at the code here, based off of what route we hit. So look, I got user ID, setting that dynamic param right in this particular route, and passing it here to this server component. So if that user ID is able to be found over here in our amazingly secure users database, then it will find that with this little function and pull out what I'm calling just the name of this user and the Tinybird token. So we also see, you would in practice have that subproperty ID also associated with the user within your database, right? So again, your row might even look much further than this, address or phone number or favorite color, birthday, that kind of thing. But for example, this would be happening on the server as basically pull who the authenticated user is, get the information that you need about them, and then we can use it to make the queries here in the next step. So I have this all written out just because my hands don't get cold, but I do definitely make a lot of typos. But there's really nothing that's too complicated that's happening here, and we'll just walk through it all. So I have 5 different queries that I'm making, kind of firing them off all at the same time. I have this plays per day, top devices, top tracks, top locations, and the real-time listeners for those 5 different charts that we're going to be showing. And you can optimize this, right? You can move these to individual server components and kind of stream in the different pieces of the app as they come. It's probably better practice. Again, maybe another PR that I'll submit. But just for simplicity, we're going to just fire off all these requests to these API endpoints that Cam is setting up and see what's coming back from them. So here, again, we're finding the user based off of the route param. We're getting that Tinybird token, and then I'm passing that Tinybird token here as an argument to these different queries, right? So I'm importing these queries. Let's see what exactly these look like. And even these are they're really not optimized. I mean, this could be a lot of there's a lot of boilerplate code that's happening here. Let's take a look at one of these actual queries. So let me move this out of the way here. We're seeing a couple of things. Just a general function. We're using the fetch request function to hit that API endpoint that you would pull directly from the Tinybird dashboard to get the information associated with that user. And I'm not setting any sort of, although you can, and we can take a look at that as well. I'm not setting any kind of query parameters here at all. Just an endpoint that knows what data to get based off of that token. And I'm converting it to the expected format and kind of logging some of this out in the console so we can see what that result ends up looking like. So here is an example response for, again, subproperty ID. This one is the devices query. But if we look at the devices query, it's the exact same thing. So that you really could probably consolidate this into one client-esque file to make that request, switch, what the endpoint ends up being based on the chart that you want to render, and then return the data as expected. So you can kind of identify like this data set is really meant for this particular chart. Okay, so we're just seeing like if I click through the rest of these, it's literally the same. The only thing that changes between some of these is the endpoint up here. So logging out here at the bottom, we're looking at the results of this top devices endpoint and all these keys up here. And I'm logging in this table, move this thing out of the way again too. We're seeing the subproperty ID, the device, and C. And I think you set these properties on your end, I think, right? Like that you can define what you want these column values to return.
Yeah. I mean, basically, that's going to be the name of the column in the result set. So obviously, I could give you a different alias, and you wouldn't have to map them over, but
Gotcha. Yep.
You can also map them over. Yep.
So in this case, we're looking at the devices, their subproperty ID, the device, and then the count of how many plays, basically, in this case, like were or viewed or played back on a desktop or on a phone. And we're ready to go, really, like to start taking this data and then massage it over into the charting library of your choice. So maybe you'll learn a new charting library today. I was starting to play around with one. We'll go inside of this individual component here in a minute that I thought was pretty cool. I'll show you that charting library here in a minute. But um, so we have all of these different results, and then I have 5 different components here that are then client components that we're handing this data off and can render it on the front end. So there's a plays per day component, stop locations, and so on. So that's kind of what's building out this layout here. And we'll see. Oh, here we're getting some live listeners because Cam started streaming some of those plays on his side. But let's go into one of these components and take a look. Again, that's a query. Go look at the component. Not a ton of code here. I mean, we're looking at actually 30 lines for this particular. This is the line chart, and I'm using a library called Trimmer. This was just really neat, nice, clean charts that were just super simple to implement, and gave you just, at least for this example, just enough ability to kind of tweak some of the layout and the class names that you want to apply to your application without requiring you to kind of build everything from scratch. I thought it was a really neat library. I would just recommend checking it out if you're building any kind of JavaScript apps. But in this case, we're pulling out the line chart component from Trimmer. They have a bunch of different components that are available. And the only thing that I'm doing here at the top is basically renaming some of these columns to fit what the expected format is for Trimmer, what they look like. So in this particular one, I wanted the label for C to not just say C. I wanted to say plays when you go over. So take a look over here. I'm configuring that kind of tooltip that's appearing to say plays rather than just C. So I'm just mapping over the data and kind of relabeling it. And then the other thing here is the index is on this D param. So this was to really just change the format of the date from what it was given from the results of Tinybird to into a format that I wanted to show as an example. But I'm pretty confident you could probably even do some of these transformations on your end, like even before the results are returned from the API call. If you wanted to just kind of format this and you knew exactly what that labeling was going to look like, you weren't going to run, A/B tests or anything like that on it. You probably could hard code some of this, and it might, depending on what your data set looks like, might be a little more performant to not just do this, inline in your component. But if you're working with a smaller data set, this might be an okay approach as well. So all we're doing again is kind of like going through all the data and relabeling, kind of massaging it for this demonstration, and then rendering this line chart component. Now, these props here are all just documented in the library that we're using, the charting library. So adding some optional class names that just help define how big this thing is and how much space, what the categories are that we need to basically drill into and look for when we are trying to display this data in this line chart, and so on. So just some small little tweaks here, but really nothing too difficult. And that's truly all it took to render this. Oh gosh, this thing is gonna be the end of me today. To render this out, all we did was basically make the API request, loop over all the data that came back so that we could just get different labels for it, and then throw it into the component, and we get all of this nice rendering on demand. And this is happening if I reload too. This is just happening in with the latest data that's coming from
Ray's awareness is really going off today.
Oh gosh, look at that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
That is a great track. Here's the link to SoundCloud. All right, so here's Cam's user, but let's also just so we're seeing all of this kind of come together in action. I'm going to go to the Dave user, and we should very well see I think we're seeing similar trends, but those are different values. Like we're not seeing the same my best track is DIY Rebellion. DIY Rebellion. And I got some folks out there that are listening in real time.
Yeah. Here, let me and I can let me see if I can bump up the my little data generator, make it just make it really make you go viral here. Let's do this. So I'm sending a lot more data. I'm curious to see if you should probably see your live listeners are no, go back to the dashboard, and you should see your live listeners kind of popping off now.
Hold on, let's see.
Being a little more oh, what have we done? Did we break something?
I'm the opposite of popping off right now.
Oh no!
I suddenly went cold.
I may have broke something. No worries.
There's also a chance that because you're working on new kind of permissions and users, that I'm using a token that's associated with different data. I'm not really sure, but it's generally going to be a small tweak that would be pulling the correct data there. And that's what it was, again, for me, that I was like, once all this kind of came together, I knew that I wanted to put together a stream like this to kind of show, like, you aren't just limited over the Mux side of things anyhow to the way that we present the data to you. Of course, you can also access some of the data via the Mux APIs and maybe make some of the calculations on your side, but you can transport it into other services and really get creative with the data that's coming out for your viewers and listeners, to show it in ways that are interesting, meaningful to your business, your product. What makes it so that your users are going to find a better experience with your product because they now have additional visibility into the way that their content is performing.
Yep. I realized what I did. I was authenticated to the wrong workspace, which is my fault. Which is why I started sending data to the wrong place. Which is why you saw no data show up. But anyways, yeah.
It hurt my ego to see that happen. I don't know what this issue is. Seems like there's maybe like trying to render something too quickly in this example. I'll have to look at that, but it seems to work when I do a reload here.
Coming back. Yeah.
There's your live listeners.
Yeah, we're back. We should be back. I'm trying to think what else. One of the things. So I mean, if you wanted to go back and we wanted to look back at Tinybird, you can basically see I created all these different APIs. We have 5 APIs, and if we go back and we look at those tokens that we had, these subproperty ID tokens. What do I have? A read all pipe. I created this read all pipes token, right, where we just give the read access, and then it has that row level security built in. So we could basically create that single token that can read all of the endpoints that we create in Tinybird. There's some other things we could do here. So like this plays per day pipe, it's a 3-node pipe. You basically see it calculates a time series between time range. I guess one of the things we didn't implement on this user, on this dashboard today, would be like a date range picker or something.
Right.
And actually, this API is kind of is implemented for that. So you could see, what I'm doing here as I build this time series data is basically saying, hey, I have this start date time and end date time parameters that can be passed as query parameters to the API. So we can kind of hook that up with a date range picker. Trimera has a great date range picker component.
Are you challenging me right now?
You've got 11 minutes.
I've got 11 minutes. It truly wasn't. It didn't take all that long. I wonder. Let me take a look at that. I didn't look at their date picker component, but that's a good point. Like that fact that you can pass params as well through the API and then have it kind of like intelligently parse into the query and give you the results that you're expecting is kind of nice.
Yeah.
And there was a line of code that I was showed at one point, but it was just adding a query param to the end of the API request. Again, right. One line of code that allows you to then filter down to the analytics that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so like, one thing that I mentioned about materialized views is aggregating, right? So like this plays per day is a good example where we're getting aggregates for each day, and we can massively improve the performance here. In fact, if I disable this endpoint, I mean, we could basically just, and what I'll do, let's say, we want to pass this sub property ID. I'll keep doing that, whatever, sub bitmap function, sub property, there we go, comma, and group by sub property ID. So what I could do is actually create a materialized view out of this one. This is this UI bug. Materialized nodes. Oh, yeah. No, I already have these template parameters. I'd have to drop those out here. This is maybe taking more time than we want, but I think it's interesting. So there's a lot of stuff going on here with this templating. Drop that out. Okay, so we have this, time series data. I'm going to, well, I can't pass query parameters. I guess we could just do, just for fun, I'm going to do this real quick. We're going to deparameterize this. What do I have? An extra one of those? Yeah. Okay. All right. Now I can create this, right? So instead of, there we go. All right. Nice of Tinybird to tell me that. So anyways, same thing, sub property ID and day, and I can create this, we'll just call this, plays per day MV, populate all this data, and you'll see this thing basically now. Okay, so if I wanted to, what I'm doing is I'm calculating these aggregates now, and I'm pushing them into this materialized view. And what you'll see here is this, this is empty, right? It's basically storing an aggregate state. So if I wanted to, I could just do something like select, let's do, what do we want? So let's just do D, and we're going to count merge. We're going to merge the results from this aggregate, and group by. And so now we're actually getting this really, really fast response. So what you can see here is actually, if I create an API endpoint out of this, I'll just call it that, that's fine. And then I grab this token. Let me add that pipe scope. I'm sorry, I know I'm moving fast. But so the sub property ID I created a token, and then now I can read that pipe, that endpoint that I just created. So if I go back to that endpoint, yeah, let's save changes. That's great. Go back to that endpoint. And so you can see, right, we're getting this count, but this is going to be for every person that's using my platform, right? I've got all this data. Let's go back and drop that token in. And now, did that work? No, maybe it didn't. Maybe I messed something up. Oh, I know why, because I'm creating a different data source. We could do something different here. Let's, well, we're running out of time. I was trying to show, basically how we can use the materialized view, but I think we could even see it like without going to this token. You can see how fast this is, right? So I've pre-calculated all these aggregates. These aggregates are being calculated over, like, we're at like 1.5 million rows now. And I'm returning these aggregates in 3 milliseconds. So that's this beautiful thing about a materialized view. It's like the first time I showed it, I wasn't actually aggregating anything. I was just kind of parsing. But it's really useful when you want to pre-calculate those aggregates and you're not doing that aggregation at query time. It's going to be much, much faster and much more performant when your users are doing all those queries. So I talked at the beginning about like concurrency, right? Like, how can we support thousands of different users that are hitting these APIs every second? Well, materialized views is a great way to do that, because again, we're only calculating those aggregates once, as new data comes in, rather than every time somebody queries.
Yeah, I think as an engineer, that was a big unlock for me to understand. Typically, I'm used to working on the front end side of things and kind of, like I said, pulling data from an API. And so I always just kind of thought like I could throw as much data as I needed to into, a MySQL database, and then just make the query that I needed to get the data that I needed. And then I was like, why is this taking so long?
Yeah,
So the fact that you can do these pre-aggregations, not only like, like you said, we don't necessarily have to do this when the data is requested. You can do it when the data is received so that
yeah,
it's ready to go and can be returned as soon as possible once it is actually requested. That was a big
yeah.
unlock for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like the high level takeaway there is like your database really matters, especially when it comes to analytics and user facing analytics. Like at a certain scale, yeah, you can get away with throwing aggregating in MySQL or Postgres or something like that. But you get to a certain scale, you're going to need a database that's really made for this kind of work. Um, Okay, we have a few minutes left. There's probably some questions, maybe in the YouTube chat. I don't know if you've seen those, Dave.
Yeah, there's one comment there that's worth addressing as well. That the streaming exports on the Mux side of things are available on a media tier, on a media plan. So while all of the data that comes through your viewing sessions from the player, if you're using Mux Video to play back, any of that content, you'll get access to that data within Mux Data as part of being just a Mux customer. So you have that visibility. You have the ability to see what are these folks watching and get sort of that high level view. The actual exporting process is part of a upgraded media tier, but there's still ways that you can get data out of Mux data and use it to your advantage as well. So because what we demonstrated here today was Kinesis streaming. So there was like that real time sort of aspect to it. There's also ways that you can implement not only within the Tinybird side and ingest data differently through, we didn't show that part, but maybe I can bring that up here really quick, through file upload, through remote URL. Here's the screen on my side. Kafka, BigQuery. So you can kind of like wire together these different approaches to being able to get the data in. And on the Mux side of things, there's also the ability to do CSV exports. And I think that it's either every 12 hours or every day that you can also do a CSV export. So while it wouldn't be the same real time sort of approach, every single view, as soon as it completes, you get that analytics, you would still be able to provide some really helpful and interesting data for your users that gives them insights into how that performance is occurring. It just wouldn't be in the same time span as what you might expect when you're doing a real time streaming experts. So there's plenty of docs and information available on that sort of approach as well. That doesn't block you. It still gives you a way to kind of grow along with the need to be able to provide an actual real time analytics in your application if you're not quite at that scale yet. I didn't see if there was anything else in the chat, but I saw that one standing out, and I just wanted to address that. Anything else coming to your mind on your side, Cam?
No, I mean, I think we've kind of covered the basics. Obviously, there's so much more we could have done here. 60 minutes goes by really, really fast. But anyways, I think we covered it. We built something. One of the things I will say is, if you are watching, from Tinybird, you'll get an email that has the link to this recording, as well as the GitHub repository that we were working from. So if you wanted to play around with this, you can do that. And then just kind of some other resources. I think we mentioned like a guide for connecting Kinesis to Tinybird. I'll include that as well. And then you may hear from Mux as well, but you'll definitely hear from us. Yeah, I think that's it. I think we're good.
I'm truly think it's pretty amazing. And I sent a tweet about this a little earlier. That's like, this used to take a long time, like to put something like this together. And the fact that you can discuss the whole pipeline and like come up with a end-to-end solution in an hour is, to me, pretty amazing. Also a testament to your amazing work. So thanks for
Well,
joining the live stream, Cam.
Tinybird makes me look really good. It makes me look much more experienced at like data than I am, which that's just it's part of the nice thing about Tinybird. There's so much more you can unlock within this platform that I can barely touch. So, uh, but yeah, happy to do this. A lot of fun.
Awesome. I don't know if we should, but I'm going to end with our favorite video clip over here at
We
Mux.
should.